The morning I came home to find a bright orange violation notice stapled to my front door. I knew my life in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision was about to get a whole lot more complicated. I had just purchased a brand new Tesla Model 3, and the previous evening I had hired an electrician to install a level 2 charging station in my garage. The installation was clean, professional, and completely contained within my property. I had checked the HOA bylaws before proceeding, finding nothing that explicitly prohibited electric vehicle charging equipment. Yet here I was, staring at a notice that demanded I remove the charger within 72 hours or face daily fines of $100. My name is Jason Whitmore, and I had moved to this San Diego suburb just 8 months ago after landing a software engineering position at a tech startup downtown. The house was perfect for my needs, a 3-bedroom ranch with a 2-car garage and a small backyard. The HOA fees seemed reasonable at $250 per month, and the neighborhood appeared well maintained. I had heard horror stories about overzealous homeowners associations, but I figured those were exaggerations. How wrong I was. I pulled the notice off my door and read it more carefully. The citation referenced Section 14.3 of the Community Bylaws, which apparently covered unauthorized exterior modifications. My charging station was inside my garage, visible only when the door was open. I had specifically chosen an indoor installation to avoid any aesthetic complaints. The notice was signed by Patricia Montgomery, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board. That afternoon, I called the HOA office and requested a meeting with Patricia. The receptionist, a friendly woman named Maria, scheduled me for the following Tuesday at 6 in the evening. She sounded sympathetic when I explained the situation, whispering that several other residents had received similar notices for various minor infractions lately. Tuesday arrived, and I drove to the community center where the HOA held its meetings. The building was a single-story structure with beige stucco walls and a tile roof that matched every other building in the development. Inside, the conference room smelled like stale coffee and air freshener. Patricia was already seated at the head of a long table, flanked by 2 other board members. She was exactly what I had expected. A woman in her early 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair, designer glasses, and an expression that suggested she had been sucking on lemons all day. "Mr. Whitmore," she said without standing or offering a handshake, "I understand you wish to discuss your violation notice." "Yes, I do." I took a seat across from her, placing a folder containing my research on the table. "I received a notice demanding I remove my electric vehicle charger, but I don't believe I've actually violated any bylaws. Section 14.3 clearly states that no exterior modifications can be made without prior board approval," Patricia said, picking up a copy of the bylaws and tapping it with one manicured finger. "My charger is inside my garage," I pointed out. "It's not an exterior modification." "Your garage door opens, does it not?" Patricia's tone was condescending, as if she were explaining something to a child. "That means the charger is visible from the street. Anything visible from common areas requires approval." One of the other board members, an older man with gray hair, cleared his throat. "Patricia, I'm not sure that interpretation is exactly what the bylaw intended." "Richard, we've discussed this," Patricia snapped at him. "We cannot have residents installing whatever they want without oversight. Today it's a car charger, tomorrow it's satellite dishes and solar panels everywhere. We have property values to protect." "Actually," I said, opening my folder, "I've done some research." California passed Assembly Bill 2565 in 2023, which specifically prohibits HOAs from banning electric vehicle charging stations. The law states that associations must allow residents to install chargers on their property, including in garages and designated parking spaces. Patricia's face tightened. I'm well aware of that law, Mr. Whitmore. However, it doesn't give you carte blanche to ignore our approval process. You should have submitted an application and waited for board review. The law says HOAs can't unreasonably restrict installation, I countered. Making someone wait for board approval, which according to your own bylaws can take up to 45 days, seems unreasonable when I need to charge my vehicle. The third board member, a woman in her 40s with dark hair, spoke up for the first time. Perhaps we could grandfather in Mr. Whitmore's installation this time, with the understanding that future residents must follow the application process. Absolutely not, Susan, Patricia said. We cannot show favoritism or make exceptions. Rules are rules. Then perhaps the rules need to be updated to reflect current laws, I suggested. Patricia stood abruptly. This meeting is over. You have 72 hours from the original notice date. That gives you until Thursday evening. If the charger isn't removed by then, we'll begin assessing fines. I left the community center frustrated and angry. Back home, I spent the evening researching California law more thoroughly. AB 2565 was clear. HOAs could establish reasonable restrictions on placement, design, and installation standards, but they couldn't prohibit chargers entirely or make the approval process so burdensome that it effectively amounted to a ban. From what I could tell, Patricia was trying to use the approval process as a workaround to block something she personally opposed. Wednesday morning, I contacted a lawyer named David Chen who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in downtown San Diego, a sleek high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. David was about my age, early 30s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. You're not the first person Patricia Montgomery has tried to bully, David told me after I explained the situation. I've handled 3 cases involving Meadowbrook Estates in the past 2 years. She runs that board like her personal fiefdom. Can she actually find me for this? I asked. She can try, David said. But based on the state law, you have a strong case. The problem is that fighting HOA disputes can be expensive and time-consuming. Most people just give in because it's easier. I'm not going to give in, I said firmly. I bought this car specifically because it's better for the environment, and I'm not going to let someone on a power trip force me to remove essential equipment. David nodded approvingly. Good. Here's what we'll do. I'll draft a letter to the board citing the relevant statutes and explaining that their actions violate state law. We'll give them an opportunity to rescind the violation notice voluntarily. If they refuse, we can file a complaint with the Department of Real Estate and potentially pursue legal action. That afternoon, David sent the letter via email and certified mail. It was professional but firm, laying out the legal case and requesting that the board withdraw the violation notice within 5 business days. I felt better knowing I had legal backing, but I also knew this was just the beginning. Thursday evening arrived, the deadline Patricia had set. I deliberately parked my Tesla in the driveway with the garage door open, the charging cable plugged in. If Patricia wanted a fight, I was ready to give her one. Friday morning, I found another notice on my door. This one informed me that I was being fined $100 per day until the violation was corrected. The notice also stated that the HOA had placed a lien on my property for unpaid fines. I took photos of the notice and forwarded them to David immediately. They're digging themselves into a hole, David said when he called me back. Placing a lien this quickly is aggressive and probably improper. We can use this. Over the weekend, I discovered I wasn't alone in my battle with Patricia. My next-door neighbor, Tom, came over Saturday morning while I was washing my car. "Hey, Jason," he said, looking around nervously. "I heard about your trouble with the HOA. I just wanted to say I think what they're doing is wrong." "Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that." A few months ago, Patricia cited me for having my trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day, Tom continued. "They were in my side yard, barely visible unless you were really looking. She made me build a storage enclosure for them. Cost me $800. That's ridiculous." "You should talk to Margaret down the street," Tom added. "She got cited for her daughter's playground equipment, said it was too colorful and violated the aesthetic standards." I spent Sunday afternoon walking through the neighborhood, talking to other residents. What I discovered was troubling. Patricia had been systematically targeting people for minor violations, seemingly based on personal grudges or petty complaints. A retired couple had been fined for planting roses that were the wrong shade of red. A young family was cited because their welcome mat was considered too large. Someone else had been forced to repaint their front door because the shade of beige didn't exactly match the approved color palette. Most disturbing was what I learned about the HOA finances. A resident named Frank, who had served on the board years ago before Patricia took over, told me he suspected financial irregularities. Several major landscaping contracts had gone to companies owned by Patricia's brother-in-law. The community pool renovation had cost nearly twice the original estimate, with the extra money going to change orders that seemed unnecessary. Monday morning, David called with news. "I heard back from the HOA's attorney. They're refusing to withdraw the violation notice. Their position is that you violated the approval process, and the state law doesn't override their procedural requirements." "What's our next step?" "We file a formal complaint with the California Department of Real Estate, and we also send a demand letter threatening legal action. I'm going to argue that their approval process, as applied, constitutes an unreasonable restriction under state law. We'll also challenge the lien as improper." "Do it," I said. That week, I started documenting everything. I took photos of my charging installation from multiple angles, showing how minimally visible it was. I compiled testimonies from neighbors about Patricia's pattern of harassment. I researched comparable HOAs in the San Diego area and found that most had updated their bylaws to explicitly allow EV chargers with reasonable restrictions. The following Tuesday, I received a letter from the HOA's attorney, a man named Gerald Blackstone. The letter was threatening in tone, warning that if I didn't comply with the violation notice, they would pursue all available legal remedies, including foreclosure on my property for unpaid fines. The letter also claimed I was being difficult and obstructionist, and suggested that my behavior was creating discord in the community. I showed the letter to David, who actually laughed. "They're bluffing." Foreclosing over HOA fines is extremely difficult in California, especially when those fines are questionable to begin with. They're trying to intimidate you. "It's working a little," I admitted. "Don't let it. We're going to fight this and win." David filed the complaint with the Department of Real Estate on Wednesday. The complaint alleged that Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, was violating California Civil Code Section 4745, which was part of the Davis-Sterling Common Interest Development Act. This section specifically addressed electric vehicle charging stations and prohibited HOAs from unreasonably restricting their installation. 2 weeks passed with no response from the state, but plenty of hostility from Patricia. She sent me weekly fine notices, each one increasing the total amount owed. According to her calculations, I now owed $1,400. I ignored them as David advised, but the constant harassment was wearing on me. Then things escalated. On a Thursday evening in late March, I came home to find my garage door wouldn't open. The power to the door opener had been cut. I checked the breaker box and discovered that someone had deliberately tripped the breaker and then damaged the switch so it wouldn't reset properly. I called the police to file a report, suspecting vandalism. The responding officer, a young patrolman named Officer Martinez, took my statement and examined the breaker box. "Looks like someone who knew what they were doing," he observed. "This wasn't random kids messing around. Someone specifically targeted your garage power." "I'm in a dispute with my HOA," I explained. "They've been trying to make me remove my electric car charger." Officer Martinez raised his eyebrows. "You think the HOA did this?" "I don't have proof, but the timing is suspicious." He wrote up a detailed report and gave me a case number. "If you can get any evidence linking specific individuals to this, let us know. Vandalism is a criminal matter, HOA dispute or not." I had an electrician come out the next day to repair the damage. He confirmed that the breaker had been deliberately sabotaged. The repair cost me $300. I sent the bill to the HOA, along with a copy of the police report, demanding reimbursement. Patricia's response was swift and predictable. She sent a letter denying any HOA involvement and suggesting that I was making false accusations to deflect from my own violations. She also informed me that the board was considering additional sanctions, including restricting my access to community amenities like the pool and clubhouse. By early April, the situation had become neighborhood gossip. I noticed people watching when I came and went, some supportive, others clearly aligned with Patricia. The subdivision was developing fault lines, with residents taking sides in what was becoming a full-blown conflict. Then I got my break. A resident named Julie, who lived 3 streets over, contacted me through social media. "I heard about your fight with Patricia," she wrote. "I have something you need to see." We met at a coffee shop outside the neighborhood. Julie was a woman in her late 20s, a paralegal who worked downtown. She pulled out her laptop and showed me documents she had obtained through a public records request. I got curious about the HOA finances after Patricia tried to fine me for having a vegetable garden in my backyard, Julie explained. So I requested copies of the financial statements, which members are entitled to see under state law. "Look at this." She showed me several years of budget reports. The numbers were eye-opening. Patricia's brother-in-law's landscaping company had been paid over $200,000 in the past 3 years, far more than comparable services should cost. There were also numerous unexplained expenses labeled as administrative costs and board discretionary spending. "There's more," Julie said, clicking to another document. Patricia approved a contract for pool maintenance to another company owned by her sister. And look at these board meeting minutes. She's been voting on contracts that benefit her family, which is a clear conflict of interest. "This is huge," I said, studying the documents. "I've already sent copies to the Department of Real Estate as part of an ethics complaint," Julie told me. "But I thought you should have them too, since you're fighting your own battle with her." I thanked Julie and immediately forwarded everything to David. He was ecstatic. "This changes everything. Financial self-dealing by board members is serious misconduct. Combined with your case, we're looking at a pattern of abuse of authority." The following week, David sent an amended complaint to the Department of Real Estate, including the financial evidence. He also sent a letter to every homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates, which was our right under state law, explaining the situation and revealing what we had discovered about the HOA's finances. The letter urged residents to attend the next board meeting and demand accountability. The reaction was immediate and explosive. My phone started ringing with calls from neighbors, some supportive, some angry that I was stirring up trouble. The community Facebook group erupted in heated debates. Patricia tried to shut down the discussion, claiming it violated the group's rules, but the moderator refused to delete the posts. The monthly HOA board meeting was scheduled for the third Thursday of April. David advised me to attend and bring as many supporters as possible. On the night of the meeting, the community center was packed. The conference room could normally hold about 40 people comfortably, but at least 70 residents showed up, with people standing along the walls and spilling into the hallway. Patricia called the meeting to order, her face tight with barely controlled anger. "We have a full agenda tonight, so let's keep comments brief and relevant. I want to discuss the allegations about financial mismanagement," called out a man I recognized from a few streets over. "That's not on the agenda," Patricia snapped. "I'm making a motion to add it," the man said. "Motion seconded," Julie added loudly. Under parliamentary procedure, Patricia had no choice but to allow the discussion. For the next hour, residents grilled the board about the expenses. Patricia tried to deflect and obfuscate, claiming that all spending had been properly approved and was within the board's authority. "Why didn't you recuse yourself from voting on contracts given to your relatives?" someone demanded. "Because they provided the best services at competitive prices," Patricia said defensively. "Did you get other bids?" another person asked. "We considered multiple options," Patricia said, which wasn't really an answer. Then I stood up. "I'd like to address my situation with the electric vehicle charger." "That's between you and the board," Patricia said. "It's not appropriate for general discussion." "Actually, it affects everyone here," I said firmly. "If the board can arbitrarily ignore state law and harass residents over legal installations, that puts all of you at risk. Today, it's my car charger. Tomorrow, it might be your solar panels or your satellite dish or your home business." Several people nodded in agreement. Tom spoke up from across the room. "I think Jason has a point. A lot of us have been cited for minor things that seem like overreach. We enforce the rules fairly and consistently," Patricia insisted. "No, you don't," said Margaret, the woman with the playground equipment. "You enforce them selectively, based on personal grudges. My daughter's playground equipment is identical to 3 others in this neighborhood, but I'm the only one who got cited. Why? Because I questioned your budget at last year's meeting." The meeting devolved into chaos, with multiple people shouting questions and accusations at the board. Richard, the older board member who had seemed sympathetic to me, eventually stood up and raised his hands for quiet. "I think it's clear we have serious problems that need to be addressed," Richard said. "I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in Patricia Montgomery's leadership as board president." Patricia's face went pale, then red. "You can't do that." "Actually, under our bylaws, any board member can call for a leadership vote," Richard said. "And it can be decided by the membership if a special meeting is properly noticed." Susan, the other board member, nodded. "I second Richard's motion." What followed was a procedural debate about how to properly call a special meeting and vote on board leadership. Eventually, it was determined that a petition signed by at least 20% of homeowners would trigger a special election. Before the meeting ended, Julie had started passing around a sign-up sheet. By the time people left that night, she had collected signatures from more than 40% of the households. Over the next 2 weeks, the neighborhood was consumed by the controversy. Patricia tried to rally her supporters, sending out emails and newsletters defending her leadership and portraying me and others as troublemakers trying to destabilize the community. But the financial evidence was damning, and more people were coming forward with stories of Patricia's arbitrary enforcement and personal vendettas. The special meeting was scheduled for the first week of May. David advised me that we were in a good position legally, regardless of the HOA politics. The Department of Real Estate had acknowledged receipt of our complaints and was conducting an investigation. The state agency had also sent a letter to the Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, reminding them of their obligations under state law regarding electric vehicle charging stations. The night before the special meeting, I was working in my garage when a car pulled up to my driveway. I was surprised to see Patricia get out. She walked up to the garage door and I stepped out to meet her. "Can I help you?" I asked cautiously. "I wanted to talk to you privately," Patricia said. Her usual aggressive demeanor was subdued, almost nervous. "Off the record." "I'm not sure that's a good idea without my attorney present. Please," she said, "just hear me out." Against my better judgment, I invited her into my backyard patio where we could talk away from the street. I didn't offer her anything to drink or any pretense of hospitality. This wasn't a social call. "What do you want, Patricia?" She took a deep breath. "I want to propose a compromise. You withdraw your complaints and the petition for my removal, and I'll personally see to it that your violation notice is rescinded. We'll even establish a streamlined approval process for EV chargers going forward." Why would I agree to that? I'm going to win anyway. "Maybe," Patricia said. "But legal battles are expensive and time-consuming. And even if you win, there will be hard feelings in the neighborhood. This way we can resolve everything cleanly." I studied her face. She looked tired, older than she had seemed at previous meetings. "What about the financial irregularities?" "The contracts to your relatives. Those were all above board," Patricia said quickly. "Maybe there were some procedural oversights, but there was no fraud or embezzlement. I genuinely believed those contractors offered the best value." "Did you get competing bids?" She hesitated. "Not always in writing, but I consulted with them verbally." "That's not how it's supposed to work, and you know it." "I'm willing to implement stricter financial controls," Patricia offered. "Require multiple written bids for contracts over a certain amount, recusal procedures for conflicts of interest, all of that." I shook my head. "It's too late for compromises, Patricia. You've been abusing your authority for years. You tried to force me to remove legal equipment from my property. You've harassed dozens of residents over petty violations, and you've potentially misused HOA funds. Even if I dropped everything, Julie and the others wouldn't. You've made too many enemies." Patricia's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake. You think you're some kind of hero, but you're just causing chaos. This neighborhood was peaceful before you moved in." "No, it wasn't. It was cowed. There's a difference." She stood abruptly. "Fine. We'll see what happens tomorrow night. But don't say I didn't try to resolve this reasonably." After she left, I called David to tell him about the conversation. He confirmed that I had done the right thing by refusing the offer. "Any compromise at this point would be a mistake," David said. "We have all the leverage and she knows it. That's why she came to you." The special meeting the next evening was even more packed than the previous one. The HOA had to move the meeting to a larger community room in the local library to accommodate everyone who wanted to attend. David accompanied me, dressed in a sharp suit and carrying a briefcase full of documents. The meeting was called to order by Richard, acting as temporary chair due to the vote of confidence issue. He explained the procedure. Residents would have an opportunity to speak for or against Patricia's continued leadership. Then there would be a vote. A simple majority of attending homeowners would decide. The debate lasted nearly 2 hours. Patricia's supporters argued that she had been a dedicated volunteer who had improved the neighborhood's appearance and maintained property values. They portrayed the complaints as overblown and driven by a few malcontents who wanted to flout the rules. But the opposition was overwhelming. One after another, residents stood up to describe experiences with Patricia's arbitrary enforcement, personal vendettas, and financial irregularities. Julie presented a detailed breakdown of the questionable contracts and expenses. Tom talked about the intimidation tactics and harassment. Others shared stories I hadn't even heard before. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I bought an electric vehicle because I believe in reducing my carbon footprint and being environmentally responsible. I installed a charger in my garage, following all building codes and safety regulations. Instead of being supported in making a green choice, I was threatened with fines and liens. That's not leadership. That's bullying. And it's also illegal under California state law. We deserve better than this. The applause that followed was loud and sustained. Patricia tried to give a closing statement defending herself, but her voice was shaky, and she seemed to have lost her usual confidence. When the vote was called, it wasn't even close. Out of 93 homeowners present, 76 voted to remove Patricia as board president. Richard and Susan retained their seats, and 3 new board members were elected on the spot to fill vacancies and create a functioning board. Patricia gathered her things in silence and left without saying goodbye to anyone. I almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered the weeks of stress, the violation notices, the threats, and the sabotage to my garage. She had brought this on herself. The new board's first official action was to rescind all pending violation notices related to electric vehicle chargers. Their second action was to establish a task force to review all HOA bylaws and update them to comply with current California law. Richard was elected as the new board president, and he promised transparency and fairness in all board dealings. 1 week later, I received a formal letter from the HOA. It was an apology for the incorrect violation notices and confirmation that my electric vehicle charging station was approved. The letter also informed me that the liens placed on my property had been released, and all fines were being waived. David called that same afternoon with more news. The Department of Real Estate completed their preliminary investigation. They found evidence of financial mismanagement and failure to follow proper procedures. Patricia and the HOA have been ordered to undergo a comprehensive financial audit. If the audit reveals fraud or embezzlement, there could be criminal charges. Will I need to be involved in that? Only as a witness if it goes to trial. But the criminal investigation would be handled by the district attorney's office, not us. 3 weeks later, the audit results came back. While there was no evidence of direct embezzlement, the auditor found that Patricia had awarded contracts totaling over $300,000 to family members without proper bidding procedures, had used HOA funds for personal expenses, and then reimbursed them without board approval, and had failed to disclose multiple conflicts of interest. The audit recommended that the HOA pursue civil action to recover misused funds. The new board voted to file a lawsuit against Patricia seeking restitution. They also referred the matter to the San Diego County District Attorney's Office for potential criminal charges related to misappropriation of HOA funds. In June, I received a call from an assistant district attorney named Sarah Chen. She wanted to interview me about the HOA situation as part of their investigation. I met with her downtown, and she asked detailed questions about Patricia's conduct, the violation notices, and the board's decision-making processes. "We're building a case for misuse of public funds," Sarah explained. HOA fees, while not technically government money, are held in trust for the benefit of the homeowners. When board members use that money improperly, it can constitute a form of embezzlement under California law. "Will there be criminal charges?" "That's what we're working toward. Based on the audit and witness statements, we believe we can prove that Patricia knowingly approved excessive payments to relatives and used HOA funds for personal benefit. If convicted, she could face jail time and substantial fines." The criminal investigation took several months. During that time, life in Meadowbrook Estates gradually returned to normal. The new board established reasonable guidelines for EV chargers. They had to be professionally installed, meet electrical code, and owners had to provide proof of insurance. But the approval process was simple and quick, just a one-page form and a 2-week review period. Several other residents installed chargers over the summer. Tom bought a hybrid and had a charger put in. Margaret got a used Nissan Leaf. The neighborhood was actually becoming more progressive and environmentally conscious, which I found encouraging. In September, the district attorney's office filed criminal charges against Patricia Montgomery. She was charged with 3 counts of misappropriation of funds, 2 counts of conflict of interest violations, and 1 count of filing false documents. The news made the local papers, with headlines about HOA corruption and abuse of power. Patricia's trial was scheduled for November. David recommended I attend, both to show support for the prosecution and to demonstrate to other HOAs that residents were willing to fight back against abuse. On the first day of trial, the courtroom was packed with Meadowbrook Estates residents. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They presented the audit findings, showing how Patricia had systematically funneled HOA money to family members. They demonstrated that she had forged board meeting minutes to make it appear that certain expenditures had been properly approved when they hadn't been. They showed personal expenses charged to the HOA credit card, including dinners, shopping trips, and even a weekend vacation that Patricia had claimed was related to an HOA conference. I was called as a witness on the 3rd day. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jennifer Ross, asked me to describe my experience with the violation notices and Patricia's attempts to force me to remove my charger. "Did Miss Montgomery ever explain why she was so opposed to your electric vehicle charger?" Jennifer asked. "Not really," I said. "She claimed it was about following procedures, but it seemed more personal than that. Like she had decided I was a troublemaker and wanted to make an example of me." "Did she ever threaten you directly?" "She threatened to foreclose on my home if I didn't pay the fines she assessed." My attorney advised me those threats were legally baseless, but they were still intimidating. Patricia's defense attorney tried to paint her as an overzealous volunteer who had made mistakes but had no criminal intent. He argued that the payments to family members were legitimate contracts for real services, that the personal expenses were honest errors that Patricia had intended to reimburse, and that the documentation issues were sloppy record keeping rather than fraud. But the evidence was too strong. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. At sentencing 2 weeks later, the judge was harsh. "Miss Montgomery, you were entrusted with significant authority over your neighbors' homes and finances. Instead of exercising that authority responsibly, you used it for personal enrichment and to settle petty grudges. Your conduct not only violated the law but also destroyed trust within your community. These crimes demand serious consequences. Patricia was sentenced to 2 years in county jail and ordered to pay restitution of $175,000 to the Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in California. As I watched the bailiff lead Patricia away in handcuffs, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Satisfaction that justice had been served, certainly. Relief that the ordeal was finally over. But also a tinge of sadness that things had escalated to this point. If Patricia had simply followed the law and treated residents fairly, none of this would have happened. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked me for a comment. I kept it brief. This case shows that HOA board members are not above the law. They have real power over people's homes and lives, and when they abuse that power, there must be consequences. I hope other boards across California learn from this and treat their residents with respect. David put his hand on my shoulder as we walked away from the cameras. You did a good thing, Jason. You stood up for yourself and ended up protecting a lot of other people too. I just wanted to charge my car, I said with a slight smile. Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance make the biggest difference. Life in Meadowbrook Estates improved dramatically after Patricia's removal. The new board was transparent, reasonable, and actually seemed to care about making the community better rather than just enforcing rules. They updated the bylaws to comply with current laws, established clear procedures for approvals, and created an online portal where residents could submit requests and track their status. More importantly, the culture of fear and intimidation that Patricia had fostered evaporated. People felt free to make reasonable improvements to their homes without worrying about vindictive citations. When disputes did arise, the board worked collaboratively to find solutions rather than immediately threatening fines. My charging station remained exactly where it was, working perfectly. I never had to remove it, and I never paid a single dollar of the fines Patricia had assessed. Every time I plugged in my Tesla, I felt a small sense of victory. The civil lawsuit to recover misused funds was settled 6 months later. Patricia's insurance and personal assets covered most of the restitution, and the HOA recovered enough money to repave several streets and upgrade the community pool facilities. It was fitting that her misconduct ended up actually improving the neighborhood she had claimed to be protecting. Other residents who had received questionable violation notices during Patricia's tenure had them reviewed and mostly rescinded. Tom got reimbursed for his trash can enclosure. Margaret was allowed to keep her daughter's playground equipment. The couple with the wrong shade of roses was given official approval for their garden. One warm evening in December, the new board hosted a neighborhood barbecue at the community center. It was the first social event I had attended since moving in, and the atmosphere was completely different from the tense meetings I remembered. People were relaxed, friendly, and actually seemed to enjoy living in Meadowbrook Estates. Tom found me by the grill, beer in hand. Hey Jason, I never properly thanked you for what you did. Standing up to Patricia took guts. I didn't really have a choice, I said. I needed to charge my car. You could have just removed the charger and avoided all the drama. A lot of people would have, maybe. But that wouldn't have been right. Julie joined us, carrying a plate of food. I heard Patricia's appeal was denied. Looks like she'll be serving the full sentence. Good, Tom said firmly. What she did was criminal. She deserved what she got. I nodded but didn't pile on. Patricia had paid a heavy price for her actions, losing her freedom, her reputation, and a substantial amount of money. The vindictive part of me was satisfied, but the rational part recognized that the real victory was in changing the system, not just punishing one person. As the sun set over the neighborhood, I looked around at my neighbors talking, laughing, and enjoying each other's company. This was what a community should feel like. Not a dictatorship run by a petty tyrant, but a place where people treated each other with respect and followed reasonable rules for everyone's benefit. My phone buzzed with a message from David. "Congrats on the appeal denial. Justice served. Drink soon." I smiled and typed back, "Definitely." The legal fees had been substantial, but the HOA's insurance had covered most of them as part of the settlement. My out-of-pocket costs ended up being around $3,000, which felt worth it for the principal involved. And David had become a genuine friend through the process, someone I could count on beyond just legal matters. As winter turned to spring, I noticed more and more electric vehicles in the neighborhood. The standardized approval process for chargers meant that anyone who wanted one could get it quickly and easily. I like to think that my fight had made it easier for others to make environmentally conscious choices. The Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, even won an award from a local environmental group for being one of the first subdivisions in San Diego to actively encourage electric vehicle adoption. Richard accepted the award on behalf of the community and made a point of mentioning my role in forcing the change. "Sometimes it takes one person willing to stand up for what's right," Richard said in his acceptance speech. Jason Whitmore didn't set out to revolutionize our HOA. He just wanted to charge his car. But by refusing to back down in the face of unjust rules, he ended up transforming our entire community for the better. I watched the speech online, feeling a mix of pride and embarrassment. I had never wanted to be the center of attention or a community hero. I just wanted to live my life without unnecessary interference. But I had learned important lessons through the experience. I learned that standing up to bullies, even institutional ones, was possible and necessary. I learned that seemingly powerless individuals could challenge entrenched authorities if they were willing to do the work. I learned that justice, while slow and expensive, was still achievable. Most importantly, I learned that I was tougher than I thought. When Patricia first slapped that violation notice on my door, I had been intimidated and uncertain. Part of me had wanted to just comply and avoid conflict. But I had trusted my instincts, done my research, and refused to be pushed around. That confidence had carried me through months of legal battles, neighborhood politics, and personal attacks. 2 years after the whole ordeal began, I was sitting on my patio on a Saturday morning, drinking coffee and reading the news on my tablet. My Tesla was plugged into the charger in the garage, quietly replenishing its battery. Everything was peaceful, normal, exactly as it should be. My phone rang. It was Richard from the HOA board. "Jason, hope I'm not bothering you," he said. "Not at all. What's up?" "The board is discussing expanding our environmental initiatives. We're thinking about installing community solar panels and maybe a few public EV charging stations in the common parking areas. Given your experience and knowledge, we'd love to have your input." I smiled. "I'd be happy to help." "Great. We're meeting Tuesday evening. Can you make it?" "I'll be there." After hanging up, I sat back and looked at my house, my neighborhood, my community. It had been a long and difficult journey from that first violation notice to this moment, but it had been worth it. Not just for me, but for everyone in Meadowbrook Estates who would benefit from fair leadership and reasonable rules. The electric vehicle revolution was happening all across California and the country. More people were making the switch every day, recognizing that sustainable transportation was both practical and necessary. And thanks to laws like AB 2565, and to residents willing to enforce those laws, HOAs couldn't stand in the way of progress anymore. As I finished my coffee and headed inside, I felt grateful. Grateful that I had stood my ground. Grateful for allies like David, Julie, Tom, and others who had supported me. Grateful for laws that protected individual rights against collective overreach. And grateful that justice, though sometimes delayed, had ultimately prevailed. My charging station hummed quietly in the garage, a symbol of both technological progress and personal victory. It represented the future of transportation, but it also represented something more fundamental: the right of individuals to make their own choices about their property and their lives, free from arbitrary interference by those who mistake authority for power. Patricia was serving her sentence, learning the hard way that abuse of trust has consequences. The Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, was thriving under new leadership, and I was living peacefully in my home, charging my electric car and looking forward to whatever came next. Sometimes the most important battles are fought over the smallest things: a car charger, a trash can, a playground. The specifics don't really matter. What matters is the principle: that rules should be fair, authority should be accountable, and ordinary people have the power to demand both. That's what I learned from fighting my HOA, and that's a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my life.